Keisha has always been a person with a big heart. Since childhood, she knew that she wanted to help people. Her upbringing in a family where kindness and mutual assistance reigned left a deep mark on her character. She often recalled how her mother brought home neighborhood children who had no food and always found an opportunity to treat them to a hot lunch. This has become her life principle, to help those who find themselves in a difficult life situation. After graduating from university, Keisha got a job at a local charity that helped the poor and homeless. Her days were filled with activities related to food distribution, organization of shelters, and work with volunteers. She had seen many stories, sad, full of despair, but sometimes inspiring, when people managed to return to normal life. These moments gave her the strength to continue despite the difficulties. Keisha lived alone in a small but cozy apartment in the city center. She was not looking for a romantic relationship and was completely immersed in her work. She enjoyed being able to help someone change their life for the better. Her days passed in a hurry, meetings, food distribution calls, sometimes working late. But even in this routine, Keisha found satisfaction. One day, returning home after a long day at work, Keisha noticed something that caught her attention. A man was sitting in a small park near her house, among old trees. His clothes were dirty, his hair was disheveled, and he looked tired. He was sitting on a bench with his head down, as if trying not to attract attention to himself. This was Marcus, a man who once had everything but lost it due to a series of unfortunate circumstances. Keisha stopped for a moment, watching him. She felt sorry for him. She saw such people every day in her work, but something about this man caught her attention more than usual. Maybe it was his posture. He didn't look like someone who had resigned himself to poverty, but rather like someone who was going through a difficult moment in life. She decided she couldn't just walk by. Going up to Marcus, she quietly sat down next to him on the bench. He did not immediately notice her presence, but when he felt that someone was nearby, he raised his head and met her gaze. There was hidden anger, pain, and fatigue in his eyes.
Hi, you look tired. How long have you been here?
Marcus looked at her in surprise. He's not used to anyone showing interest in him. Usually people tried not to notice him or passed by with an expression of disgust on their face.
A long time ago. I don't remember how much time has passed.
Keisha felt her heart clench with pity. She knew that this was a man who needed help, but might not be ready to accept it yet.
Are you okay? Can I help you with something?
Marcus hesitated a little. He was ashamed of his position and did not want to look weak in front of her, but her kindness seemed sincere to him. He looked down, as if trying to collect his thoughts.
I don't need pity, if that's what you want to offer. Everything is fine. It's just hard times.
Keisha saw in front of her a man who had clearly been through a lot. His face said that he had once been proud and confident, but now his life had turned upside down. She wasn't going to impose, but she understood that he needed help, even if he didn't want to admit it.
Pity has nothing to do with it. I work for a charity, and believe me, I know how it is. Sometimes each of us needs help, and there's no shame in that.
Marcus looked at her again, surprised by her directness and unwillingness to just walk away like so many others did. He sighed and shrugged slightly, as if surrendering to reality.
I've lost everything. Work, home, debts accumulated, and I ended up here. It's a long story, but no one wants to listen to it.
Keisha felt that in front of her sat a man with an interesting story, a man who deserved a second chance. She didn't want to put pressure on him, but she was sure she could help him.
You know, if you want to tell your story, I'll listen, but if not, it's okay. Anyway, if you need food or a place to rest, I can offer help.
Marcus relaxed a little. He is not used to the fact that someone offers him help just like that, without expecting something in return. It was hard for him to trust people after everything he had been through, but there was something in Keisha's eyes that made him feel safe.
Do you really want to help? Why?
Keisha smiled and shrugged her shoulders.
Because sometimes it just needs to be done, and if I can help, I help. That's what makes me happy.
Marcus nodded silently. He didn't know what to say. It was strange for him to accept help from a complete stranger, but something inside him said that she could be trusted. He realized that his pride should not prevent him from accepting what he really needed. The next day, Keisha came to the park again to see Marcus. She brought him food and offered to help him find temporary housing through her organization. Marcus didn't want to agree to help at first, but Keisha, with her warmth and sincerity, managed to overcome his inner barriers. That's how their friendship began. Keisha visited him every day, bringing food and learning more about his life. She learned that Marcus was a successful man who once had a good job, family and home, but a series of setbacks, job loss, financial difficulties and divorce led him to this state. He found himself in a position where the whole world seemed to turn away from him. As the weeks passed, Keisha became more and more attached to this man. She saw him trying to get his old life back. Despite all the difficulties, she offered him temporary accommodation with her until he found a job and got back on his feet. Marcus resisted for a long time, not wanting to be a burden, but eventually agreed. He knew he couldn't stay outside forever, and he felt Keisha genuinely wanted to help. When Marcus moved into her house, their relationship remained strictly friendly. Keisha never tried to break that line, although she felt that something more was emerging between them. They began to spend more time together, discussing their lives, sharing their thoughts and experiences. Keisha saw in Marcus not just a homeless man, but a man who had gone through difficult trials and deserved a second chance. Marcus, in turn, began to open up to her. It wasn't easy for him to talk about his failures, but he felt safe with Keisha. He understood that she was not judging him, but only wanted to help him get his life back. In her kindness, he found what he had missed so much in recent years, and although neither Keisha nor Marcus had planned for their friendship to grow into anything more, they felt the bond between them growing stronger every day. After the first meeting with Marcus in the park, Keisha couldn't stop thinking about him. His tired eyes, full of hidden pain and disappointment, haunted her. She saw him as more than just a homeless man who found himself in a difficult situation. There was something more in him, depth, strength of spirit, which under the weight of circumstances began to seem lost. Keisha felt she had to help him, even if he wasn't ready to accept it yet. The next day, on her way home from work, Keisha went back to the park and saw Marcus on the same bench. He sat with his arms crossed over his chest, lost in thought. She brought him food, a fresh sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water, and despite his initial embarrassment, Marcus accepted it anyway.
I didn't want to force you to take anything. I just thought you might be hungry.
Marcus grimaced a little, feeling his pride take over again. But he was really hungry. He reluctantly took the sandwich and nodded his thanks.
Thank you. You're too kind. I don't know what I've done to deserve such attention.
Keisha smiled as she sat down next to him on the bench. She felt she had to be patient, not press him with questions, but she was curious to know how he ended up in such a situation.
I just think that sometimes we all need a little help. It's not about merit, Marcus. It's just a desire to help.
She was silent for a moment, watching as he began to eat, and there was fatigue in his movements. Marcus was not just hungry, he was mentally exhausted, and this was reflected in his every gesture. Keisha decided it was time to get to know him better.
You said you had a different life before. What happened?
Marcus slowly lowered the sandwich onto his lap and closed his eyes for a second, as if gathering his thoughts. His face was serious, and deep down he knew that telling about his life would be painful. But maybe there was some catharsis in it. He needed someone to hear his story, to share what he was trying to forget.
It's a long story. I was once a successful person. Work, house, car, everything that is required. I was a manager in a large company. I had a business, but everything has changed in a few years.
He looked at her and then continued.
It started with the fact that I was cut. I thought I would quickly find something new, but things got bad in the economy, and there were few offers. My savings began to melt. Then debts appeared. At some point, I lost my house, couldn't pay my rent, and then my wife left me. It can be understood I was no longer the person I used to be. Everything fell apart before my eyes.
Keisha listened attentively. Her heart shrank from his story. She saw in front of her not just a homeless man, but a man who once had everything, but fate mercilessly cut off his path. There was bitterness in his voice, but not only for the world, but also for himself. Marcus was clearly a man who was used to relying only on himself, and losing control of his life was the hardest blow for.
I'm so sorry, Marcus. I can't even imagine what it would be like to lose everything.
He chuckled a little, but it was a bitter laugh without joy.
Do you know what the hardest part is? Do not lose money or things. It can be lived through. The hardest thing is to lose yourself. When everything around you collapses, you start to lose confidence in who you are and what you can do. It's like an eternal fall, and you don't know when you're going to hit the bottom.
Keisha paused, giving him a chance to speak. She understood that right now it was important for him to be heard, not pitied. His story was full of pain, but there was also strength in it, the strength of a man who had not yet given up, despite all the difficulties.
But you're still here. You didn't break down. This already says a lot.
Marcus looked up, meeting her gaze. He hadn't expected to hear such words, and it touched him a little. He hadn't heard anything like it in a long time. Everyone around him either ignored him or treated him with pity, but Keisha was different.
I just exist. I'm not sure that this can be called life.
Keisha knew that he needed something more than just existence. He needed a chance to get his life back, and she believed that he had all the strength to do it. She saw potential in him, which was hidden under a layer of disappointment and pain.
Maybe it's not life, but it's a start. You can go back to who you were. I believe in it.
Marcus was silent for a long time, considering her words. He was not used to anyone believing in him, especially now that he had long lost faith in himself. But her confidence began to penetrate his soul, giving him hope that he had long lost. The next day, Keisha came back to the park with food, and their conversations continued. She began to learn more about Marcus, his dreams, and how he ended up in this situation. Marcus gradually opened up to her, seeing that she was genuinely interested in his life. He was grateful for her attention, but he still felt uncomfortable accepting help. But one day, Keisha decided to take a step forward. She had been thinking for several days about what she could offer Marcus to temporarily stay with her, so that he could get back on his feet. It was clear to her that staying on the street was not an option for a man who had once lived a completely different life. When they were sitting in the park again, Keisha decided to talk about it.
Marcus, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I want to help you. I know it's not easy for you to accept help, but I believe that you can return to a normal life if you have at least temporary shelter. Why don't you move in with me for a while?
Marcus looked at her in disbelief. This proposal was unexpected and caused him an internal conflict. On the one hand, he was grateful for her care, but on the other hand, his pride did not allow him to accept such help. Are you serious? I can't just move in with you. This is wrong. I don't want to be a burden to you. Keisha sighed and, looking at him with a soft smile, replied,
You won't be a burden to me. I'm not offering this out of pity. You're not a stranger to me, and I want to help. If you don't take this step, how can you rebuild your life? You deserve more than just to sit in the park and hope for the best.
Marcus fell silent again. There was a struggle going on inside him between the desire to remain independent and the realization that he needed help. He understood that staying on the street was dangerous for his health and future, but accepting Keisha's offer meant overcoming his own fears and prejudices. Finally, he sighed and nodded.
Good, but only temporarily. I can't stay with you for long.
Keisha smiled, feeling that she had made the right move.
Of course, as long as you need to get back on your feet.
And so a new chapter in Marcus's life began. Marcus thought about Keisha's offer for a long time before agreeing. His pride, wounded by years of failures and disappointments, made him hesitate. He wasn't used to accepting help, especially one as generous and sincere as Keisha's. It was hard for him to admit that he was no longer able to cope with life's difficulties alone, and despite his inner resistance, he still agreed to move in with her. It was a temporary solution, he told himself, a necessary step to get back on his feet and regain his independence. Keisha didn't put pressure on him and gave him complete freedom of choice. She understood how difficult it was for Marcus to agree to help, and therefore tried to make this transition as smooth as possible. There was a lot of free space in her cozy apartment, as well as the warmth and care that she was ready to offer him. She understood that for him it was not just a matter of housing, it was a matter of dignity and self-respect. Keisha respected his feelings and tried to support Marcus without violating his personal space. When Marcus moved in with her, he felt awkward. On the one hand, he was grateful for the opportunity to have a roof over his head again, but on the other hand, he was uncomfortable being in the care of a woman who offered to help him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was in a place he didn't deserve, and often avoided discussing his problems with Keisha so as not to look weak. He didn't want their life together to seem like a temporary refuge to him or her. However, Keisha did not give him any reason for discomfort. She was caring and unobtrusive, allowing him to adapt at his own pace. Their life together began quietly and modestly. Keisha didn't make any demands on Marcus, didn't try to invade his personal space. She took care of him as a friend, expecting nothing in return. There was nothing in her behavior that could make Marcus feel like a burden. She cooked for the two of them, and sometimes left little notes wishing them a good day before going to work. There was sincerity and kindness in her actions, and this gradually began to soften his barriers. Marcus tried not to remain in debt. He quickly took over some household chores. For example, he started helping Keisha with cleaning and cooking. These small actions gave him the feeling that he was not just a guest in her house, but a full-fledged participant in their common life. Over time, he also started looking for a job. It was difficult for him in his situation, but Keisha was there for him, supported him mentally and helped him compile a resume, as well as looking for potential vacancies for him through her friends. She spared no time in inspiring Marcus and motivating him to return to a normal life. They maintained an exceptionally friendly relationship. Neither Keisha nor Marcus were in a hurry to cross that line. They both understood that the most important thing for Marcus right now was to recover and regain a sense of control over his own life. Keisha saw how hard it was for him to come to terms with the loss of what had once been his identity. She wasn't trying to fill the void with a romantic relationship. It was more important for her to help him find himself anew. In turn, Marcus showed deep gratitude and respect for Keisha. Her sincerity and genuine kindness touched his heart. He often thought about how his future might have turned out if he hadn't met her. It was hard for him to believe that there are people who are ready to selflessly help another person without demanding anything in return. Keisha became for him an example of that rare kindness, which is not often found in a world full of disappointments and selfishness. Weeks passed, and Marcus began to slowly regain his confidence. Keisha often talked to him about his goals, helped him make sense of what had happened, and consider future options. She tried to make him think that his past failures were not the end, that he could still start over if only he believed in himself. These conversations gave Marcus strength, and soon he began to look for work with more confidence. Keisha also found several temporary work options for him through her charity organization. These first steps were important for Marcus. He was able to feel useful again a person who controls his fate. These were small successes, but they gave him confidence and helped him overcome the feeling of helplessness that had been haunting him for a long time. Besides work, they spent a lot of time together discussing not only problems but also ordinary, everyday things. They shared their thoughts about movies, books, and discussed the news. Gradually, their communication became easier and more natural. They started laughing, shared personal stories and experiences, and an emotional intimacy arose between them, which, despite its depth, still remained friendly. Marcus began to notice how his attitude towards life had changed. He started planning for the future again, building small goals, and not just existing. Keisha, on the other hand, became not only a friend for him, but also a support to whom he could turn in difficult times. He began to feel that his life had meaning, that he was not alone in his attempts to find a way out of this situation. For Keisha, these changes were obvious. She saw Marcus gradually regaining his confidence and stability. She felt proud of him, but at the same time she realized that his successes were the result of his own efforts. She was there to support him, but all his achievements were his merit. This gave her even more satisfaction from their friendship and life together. Meanwhile, Marcus felt more and more grateful to Keisha, but also began to notice that his feelings for her had become deeper than he expected. He respected and admired her kindness and generosity, but now he began to see her not just as a friend, but as a woman who had become an important part of his life. He didn't know how to properly express these feelings, and he wasn't sure if Keisha saw him in that light. He understood that she could only see in him a person who needed to be helped and did not want to destroy what was between them. Keisha, in turn, also couldn't help but notice the changes in her own feelings. Despite the fact that she initially offered to help Marcus because of his plight, over time her heart began to gravitate towards him. She saw in him the strength, resilience, and courage that he showed despite his difficulties. She admired his determination and desire to change, but like Marcus, she was in no hurry to rush things. She understood that the most important thing for him now was to restore himself, and she did not want to complicate the situation with romantic feelings. Thus, their life together continued in an atmosphere of mutual understanding and support. Every day they helped each other, coming closer, but at the same time remaining friends. Marcus continued to look for work, and his efforts began to bear fruit. Eventually, thanks to his skills and Keisha's recommendations, he received a job offer at a local company, which was an important step for him to regain independence. It was a new stage in Marcus's life, and he was determined to move forward. But despite his successes, he knew that he would not have been able to achieve this without Keisha's help. She became a source of inspiration and motivation for him, and he was grateful for her presence in his life. As the days turned into weeks, the relationship between Keisha and Marcus began to gradually transform. Initially, their bond was based on gratitude and the help that Keisha offered Marcus. She saw in him a man who found himself in a difficult situation and needed support, and he, despite his pride, was grateful for her kindness and generosity. However, over time, their communication became deeper, and friendly feelings began to grow into something more. Their life together, which began with a clear understanding of boundaries, has become more and more natural and comfortable. They learned to understand each other without words. Their daily interaction became more harmonious and filled them both with ability. Keisha felt that her home was now filled with warmth and joy, which she lacked. Marcus, in turn, was gaining more and more confidence in himself. and this was reflected in his behavior. He began to realize that he could trust Keisha, and that trust strengthened their bond. At first, these were ordinary everyday activities, having dinner together, watching movies or discussing the news over a cup of coffee. However, these moments have become more significant. Every evening they could talk about something personal, share their thoughts and experiences. Keisha often talked about her work and how she strives to help people, and these stories touched Marcus even more. He saw in her not just a kind woman, but a person who sincerely wanted to change the world for the better. Her energy and commitment to helping others inspired him. Keisha, in turn, admired Marcus more and more. When he told her about his life before everything went wrong, she saw in front of her not a homeless man, but a strong man who had gone through a lot of difficulties, but did not give up. He was a man with deep convictions, capable of compassion and caring. In each of his stories, his desire for justice and desire to change his life were felt. She saw in him not just someone who needed help, but a person with great potential and dignity. Their conversations became more and more personal. One day, Marcus told Keisha about how difficult it was to get through a divorce and the loss of a family. This experience left deep wounds on his soul, and he could not recover from the loss for a long time. Keisha listened to him attentively, without interrupting, and she was hurt for what he had been through. But she also saw incredible resilience in him. Despite all the difficulties, he continued to fight, even when it seemed that all was lost. Keisha began to feel that her own emotions had become more complex. At first, she saw Marcus solely as the person she was helping, but now that feeling was growing into something more. She began to notice in him the traits that were dear to her: kindness, determination and respect for others. His attentive attitude towards her and the way he took care of his place in her life only strengthened her affection. Marcus, in turn, began to realize that his feelings for Keisha were also changing. He admired her kindness and fortitude more and more. He saw how she devoted herself to other people every day, how she worked for a charity, and how she supported him. But the main thing he felt was her sincerity. Keisha wasn't trying to be someone, she was herself, and that delighted him. She never reproached him for the past or reminded him that he was homeless when they met. In her eyes, he was always just Marcus, a man who needed support, not pity. Over time, Marcus began to feel more confident in Keisha's house. Their life together became more and more harmonious. He helped her around the house, cooked breakfast, and sometimes they went for walks around the city or the park together. Every moment they shared was filled with warmth and respect for each other. It wasn't just friendship, it was more than that, although neither Keisha nor Marcus had yet dared to admit it to themselves. One day, when they were sitting in the kitchen after dinner, Keisha suggested that Marcus read one of his favorite books. She loved to share with him what was dear to her, and books were an important part of her life. They spent the whole evening discussing literary works, and in that moment Marcus realized how much he appreciated Keisha. For him, she was not just a woman who gave him a helping hand, she was a person with whom he could be real. In turn, Keisha also began to notice that her feelings for Marcus were getting deeper. He was not only a grateful friend, but also a strong, wise man who taught her a lot. Their conversations helped her understand how important it is to have someone who can understand and support her. She began to see in Marcus not just a person she helps, but an equal partner with whom she can build a life. Over time, there were more physical expressions of care between them. Marcus was touching her hand more and more often when he wanted to say something, and Keisha was getting more and more used to his presence next to her. These touches were gentle and barely noticeable, but there was so much warmth and sincerity in them that both began to realize that their relationship went beyond friendship. Despite the closeness that had arisen, both Keisha and Marcus did not talk about it out loud for a long time. They were both afraid of destroying what they already had. Marcus especially felt responsible for not rushing things. He didn't want Keisha to think that he was using her kindness for his own purposes. He was too grateful for her help and respect to put it at risk. But his inner feelings grew stronger, and every day Marcus became more and more aware that Keisha had become for him not just a friend, but a person with whom he would like to spend his life. He saw in her the woman with whom he could build a new chapter of his life, free from the past and difficulties. There was a power in her that helped him move forward, and it inspired him to new achievements. Keisha also began to feel that she could no longer hide her feelings. She knew she was falling in love with Marcus, but she was afraid that he didn't share her emotions or that their relationship would become too complicated. She appreciated him as a friend, as a man who had overcome a lot, and did not want to destroy what they had already built. However, Despite these doubts, their bond continued to grow. Marcus began to notice that Keisha had become for him the woman he had always been looking for, but never found. Her support and care helped him recover as a person, and now he wanted to be someone for her who could give her something more, not only gratitude, but also true love. Their feelings gradually became apparent to both of them. Keisha and Marcus increasingly spent time together without having to talk about their emotions. They understood each other without words, and in every gesture and look there was a closeness that no longer needed explanation. Marcus began to think about how to express his feelings. He was afraid that his confession might change everything, but he knew that it would be wrong to hide his affection any further. He couldn't ignore how he felt about Keisha anymore. She became for him not just a friend, but something much more. A person with whom he could build a new, happy life. For a long time, Marcus did not dare to admit, even to himself, that his feelings for Keisha went beyond friendship. Every day he spent with her increased his affection and admiration for this woman, but he still doubted whether his confession could ruin everything. He was afraid to lose the intimacy they had built up all this time. Keisha became not just a friend for him, but someone much more important. She was the person who helped him find a way back to a normal life. She had given him faith in himself, and now he was afraid that his romantic feelings could destroy everything they had built together. However, his feelings only grew stronger every day. He began to realize that he could no longer stand aside and hide from Keisha, that his heart belonged to her. It was a difficult decision. Marcus was afraid of being rejected, not because he doubted her kindness, but because he didn't know if she saw him as a potential partner or if their relationship would remain exclusively friendly. He respected her and did not want to inconvenience her with his confession, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to remain in this uncertain state. Keisha also felt that something more was growing between them. Her thoughts kept returning to Marcus, but she was in no hurry to openly express her emotions. She was afraid that if something went wrong, they might both lose the intimacy that made their life together so special. She saw Marcus as a strong and kind man who had been through a lot, and she didn't want to ruin their relationship because of her doubts. Her attraction to him was obvious, but she still hesitated, not knowing how Marcus would take her feelings. However, there came a moment when it became impossible to restrain your emotions. One evening, as they sat on the couch after dinner, discussing the events of the day, Marcus felt that he could no longer hide his feelings. It was an ordinary evening like many others. They were laughing, discussing something insignificant, but all the while words were maturing in his heart that he was afraid to say. He understood that this was not the moment to prepare or expect the perfect time for a confession. It was natural, like breathing. And at some point, as if on a hunch, he realized that he could no longer keep it to himself. Marcus knew that this step could change everything. He understood that now their relationship would either move to a new level or be in danger. But his feelings were too strong to ignore anymore. He didn't want to hide behind his fears. Everything he's been through over the past few years has taught him that life is too short to put off such important moments. Gathering his courage, Marcus decided to tell Keisha about his feelings. He chose this moment because he felt it was the right time. He felt so comfortable in her company that he realized that if he didn't say it now, he would regret it. He didn't know how Keisha would react, but he couldn't hide the fact that he loved her anymore. Marcus's confession was unexpected for Keisha, but at the same time it seemed quite natural to her. She knew that their friendship was gradually developing into something more, and although she was afraid to take the first step, his words were a relief to her. Keisha also had romantic feelings for Marcus, but did not want to rush things, fearing that her initiative could destroy their relationship. When Marcus confessed his feelings to her, she felt that her own doubts were dispelled. All this time she had been waiting for this very moment, when something would happen between them that would completely change their lives. After Marcus opened up to Keisha, their relationship began to change. Both understood that this was the beginning of something new. It was no longer just a friendly relationship built on mutual support. Now they realized that there was a real romantic connection between them. But the most important thing was that it was natural and organic for both of them. They knew each other better than anyone else. They went through hardships together and built a solid foundation of trust. Despite the novelty of their feelings, they were in no hurry. Their relationship developed slowly and harmoniously without pressure and hasty decisions. The most important thing for them was to preserve the sincerity and depth that was originally embedded in their friendship. They continued to live together as before, but now their interaction was filled with a new emotional intimacy. They no longer hid their feelings, and this brought them both great relief. Every day their relationship grew stronger. Marcus admired Keisha for her kindness, strength, and sincerity. He felt like he was becoming a better version of himself next to her. He realized that his life had changed thanks to her support, and now he wanted to make her happy. Keisha saw in Marcus not only a strong man, but also a man with a kind heart, able to take care of others. She felt protected and confident around him, and this feeling was new to her, but very valuable. They continued to spend evenings together talking and studying together. Now it was not only discussions of everyday affairs, but also conversations about the future. Both understood that their bond was growing stronger, and gradually began to make plans for a life together. Keisha, who initially saw Marcus as a person who needed help, now saw him as an equal partner. She was proud of his successes and saw how he overcame difficulties, regaining his confidence. Marcus, for his part, was determined to build a life with Keisha that would be based on mutual understanding and respect. He wanted to be the person who could give her the love and care she deserved. He understood that their relationship is not just romance, but also a strong union of two people who are ready to support each other in any situation. Over time, their relationship only became stronger. They have learned to rely on each other, building their relationship on trust and respect. They supported each other not only in everyday matters, but also in difficult life situations. Marcus continued to work on himself, rebuilding his career and regaining his confidence. Keisha supported him every step of the way, and together they became a real team. Their lives were filled with joint plans and dreams. Marcus began to build a new career and was determined to reach new heights. He no longer saw himself as the man who was at the bottom. He became a man who was ready to move forward for the sake of his future with Keisha. Keisha, in turn, continued to work for the charity, but now she knew that her work not only benefits others, but also makes her personal life more fulfilling.
Over time, their relationship became what can be called true love. It was a love based on mutual respect and support, a deep understanding of each other, and a willingness to be there for each other in any situation. Keisha and Marcus knew that their life together would be full of both joys and over time, Marcus really managed to rebuild his life. At first it was not easy. He learned to believe in himself again, to rediscover those qualities that once allowed him to be a successful and self-sufficient person. Thanks to Keisha's support and his inner strength, he was coming out of the darkness he found himself in step by step. Now he had a job, a stable income, and most importantly, confidence in the future. Keisha was always there for him, and their relationship became the basis of his rebirth. After getting a new job, Marcus gained not only financial independence, but also regained his faith in his abilities. His new position was related to project management, which was consistent with his past experience, and Marcus was able to easily adapt to the work environment. He felt rediscovered, and now his goal was not only to build a career, but also to be the best partner for Keisha, as she was for him. Keisha, in turn, was proud of him. She had seen how far Marcus had come since their first meeting, and her admiration and love for him had only grown. Their life together was filled with new joys. Now they were making plans for the future, which included not only their daily worries, but also discussing more significant topics from joint financial goals to starting a family. Keisha saw in Marcus not just someone she had helped once, but an equal partner who could be relied on in any situation. Over time, their thoughts began to turn more and more often to the topic of marriage. Both understood that their relationship had reached a new level, and the issue of marriage had become a natural continuation of their life together. This decision did not come to them suddenly. Gradually, they both began to discuss their lives, the future, and in these conversations there was a common confidence that they wanted to spend it together. It was a moment of special significance for Marcus. Once he had lost everything, and it seemed that life would no longer give him a chance to start over. But thanks to Keisha and her love, he was able to overcome this crisis. Now that his life was stable again, he wanted to give Keisha what she deserved, not only gratitude, but also a promise of love and fidelity for life. He knew that he was ready to take this step, and he was confident in his choice. Marcus had thought the proposal through carefully. He wanted this moment to be special for Keisha, to make her feel how much she meant to him. That evening, when he decided to propose to her, everything was perfect. The dinner prepared by Marcus, Keisha's favorite flowers, and a calm, romantic atmosphere. They spent this evening like many others before, but this time there was something special in the air. Marcus was calm, but emotions were bubbling inside him. He knew that this was the most important moment in their lives, and he was ready for it. After dinner, as they sat together on the balcony, Marcus felt that the moment had come. He looked at Keisha and, taking her hand, said the words that she did not expect to hear right now, although she had long guessed his intentions. There was sincere love and gratitude in his eyes for everything she had done for him. He knew that his life could have turned out very differently without her, and now he was ready to link his fate with her forever. Keisha was touched to the core. Marcus asked her to become his wife, and at that moment she realized that all the difficulties they had gone through together had led them to this wonderful moment. Her heart was overflowing with joy, and she didn't hesitate for a second to answer. Yes, it was just as important to her as it was to Marcus. She knew that their love had been through trials, and now they were both ready to start a new stage of life as spouses. The wedding planning took place in a joyful and calm atmosphere. They did not aspire to a big and magnificent celebration. It was important for them that this day reflected their path and their feelings for each other. They chose a cozy ceremony with their closest friends and family. All they needed was to be together and share this moment with those who had supported them throughout their history together. The wedding day was the culmination of their relationship. Keisha looked dazzling in her simple but elegant wedding dress. Marcus, in a formal suit, was full of pride and joy. Everyone who attended the ceremony saw their love and respect for each other. This wedding was not just a marriage, but a symbol of their common victory over the difficulties they had overcome together. Their union, born of friendship and mutual support, became an example of how love and kindness can change lives. Marcus, who had once lost everything, now stood next to Keisha, feeling that his life had finally found the meaning he had been looking for a long time. He was grateful for every moment they lived together, and he was sure that there were many more happy moments ahead of them. Keisha, in turn, felt that her life had become full thanks to Marcus. She knew that now she had not only a loved one, but also someone who would always be there to support her in all her endeavors. After the wedding, their lives gradually returned to their usual course, but now they were connected not only by love, but also by official obligations to each other. It didn't change their relationship dramatically, but it gave them both a sense of greater stability and confidence in the future. They continued to build their life together, supporting each other in everything, as it was before. Keisha continued her work at the charity, helping people, as she once helped Marcus. She drew inspiration from their story, knowing that everyone deserves a second chance. Marcus continued to develop in his new job, striving to make a career and contribute to their common future. He felt that now that he had Keisha, he could handle any difficulties. Their home became a place where warmth and joy always reigned. They shared with each other everything that happened in their lives, discussed plans for the future, and built their dreams together. Now their lives were connected not only by the past, but also by the future they were building together. Their story has become an example of how kindness and support can lead to true love. She showed that even the most difficult difficulties can be overcome if there is someone nearby who is ready to lend a shoulder and go together to the end. Keisha and Marcus have been through a lot, but it has only made their union stronger. Now they were not only a couple, but also a real team, ready to face all the challenges of life together. The conclusion of their marriage was the beginning of a new stage, where they were both ready for new challenges, but already as spouses. The difficulties they went through together made them stronger and their love deeper. Now they knew that they could cope with any challenges, and were confident that their union would be long and strong.
The wedding was unforgettable, full of joy and happiness, but a few weeks passed after the honeymoon, and life gradually began to return to normal. Keisha and Marcus found themselves facing a reality that no longer looked as romantic as the first days after their wedding. Now they had to build their new life together, not just to enjoy each other, but also to solve everyday tasks and everyday problems. At first, everything seemed wonderful. They both believed that love could overcome any difficulties. Every morning they woke up in each other's arms, smiling at the new day. Marcus went to his new job, returned home thinking about how they would spend the evening together. Keisha continued to work for the charity, putting all her efforts into helping those in need. However, gradually in understanding came love is not only passion, kisses at sunset, and perfect days, but also the ability to cope with routine. Expectations and reality began to collide, creating small cracks in their seemingly flawless relationship. The first problem was space. Marcus had moved into Keisha's apartment, and now every corner of her cozy, orderly home was filled with his belongings. She used to enjoy cleanliness and order. She had her own little place where she could relax after a long day. Now it seemed to her that everything had become cramped. Marcus's things were lying where they had been in perfect order before. It took Marcus a moment to realize that this was starting to annoy Keisha. For him, clutter was a part of life. Previously, when he was successful, he always had a housekeeper who kept things clean, so he didn't have the habit of cleaning up after himself at all. It seemed to him that it didn't matter, that his love for Keisha would cover any little things, like scattered socks or untidy dishes. But Keisha began to notice every detail, every little thing, and they irritated her more and more. At first she was silent, trying to calm herself down. Well, it's Marcus, he's been through so much. I can't blame him for that, she thought, forcing herself to smile when she saw him throw his shirt on the chair once again. But gradually her patience began to run out. Keisha often came home tired after work. She continued to help those who were in trouble, listened to their stories, gave advice, and tried to support everyone who needed her help. Her work absorbed her completely. And when she came home, all she wanted was peace and quiet. But instead she saw the mess and felt that her personal space had disappeared. And one evening, when she returned home later than usual, after a particularly difficult day, her patience snapped. She went into the apartment and immediately came across Marcus's shoes lying right in the middle of the hallway. His jacket was lying nearby, which seemed to have been thrown there on purpose to test her nerves for strength. Something exploded inside Keisha.
Marcus. Marcus.
Keisha went into the living room, where he was sitting on the couch, engrossed in some video on his phone. He looked up, saw her face, and immediately felt that something was wrong. Marcus, what happened?
What happened? Are you serious? Is that what you're asking?
She pointed at the scattered things.
It's just shoes, Keisha. Don't get so worked up.
Shouldn't you get turned on? Do you even see what's going on? You live here as if you don't have any responsibility.
Marcus, realizing that it wasn't the shoes, but the accumulated irritation, tried to justify himself.
I didn't have time to clean up. It doesn't mean that I don't care. I get tired at work, just like you.
Are you tired? But it's hard for me too. And when I come home, I don't want to stumble into a mess, as if it's not our house, but a garbage dump.
She turned around and went into the bedroom, closing the door loudly behind her. She needed to be alone to process her feelings. A storm was raging inside her. She was hurt. She couldn't understand how their honeymoon had turned into a series of annoyances and discontent. Meanwhile, Marcus remained sitting on the couch. He stared into the void, trying to digest what had happened. He knew Keisha was right, but at the same time it was hard for him to admit that he had really overlooked something important. For him, this marriage was a new beginning, a second chance at life, and he didn't want to believe that such little things could ruin their happiness. Deep down, he was afraid. He was afraid that after everything they had gone through together, after all the difficulties they had gone through, it would be the little things of everyday life that would cause their discord. But he also understood that he had to change something. He needed to become more attentive, more responsible. Several hours have passed. Keisha was still in the bedroom. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and thought about how everything had changed since they started living together. She did not expect that the marriage would be so difficult. Of course, they loved each other, but love did not solve all problems. She wanted to go back to the days when everything was simple and easy, when every morning started with a smile, and not with thoughts of where to find a place for another Marcus shirt. Keisha knew that he wasn't the only one with a problem. She has changed herself. Since the wedding, her expectations have become higher. She wanted their life to be perfect, like in those fairy tales she heard as a child. But the reality turned out to be different, and it upset her. When Marcus finally knocked on the bedroom door, Keisha didn't immediately answer. She continued to lie in silence, not knowing what to say to him. But Marcus did not wait for an invitation. He quietly entered and sat on the edge of the bed.
I understand that you're angry, and so am I. I was wrong. I really need to try harder. But understand, it's hard for me too.
Keisha stood up, leaning on a pillow, and looked at him.
I just need you to be more attentive. I'm tired of all this chaos.
Marcus nodded.
I'll try. Truth.
These words sounded sincere, and although Keisha was still annoyed, she understood that this was a step forward. He was willing to listen and change for her, for both of them. A few more weeks have passed. They began to learn to live together for real, not hiding their feelings and problems, but discussing them. Marcus tried to help more around the house, and Keisha learned not to react to small things with such acuteness. It wasn't easy, but they both knew that this period was an important part of their life together. They were learning how to live together in the real world, where the honeymoon ends and real life begins. It's been a few months since Keisha and Marcus started getting used to each other. All their domestic problems gradually smoothed out, and they were able to find a compromise. At some point in their lives, there was a calmness that could be called stability. But this calmness turned out to be deceptive. Where one problem is solved, a new one always appears. So it happened in their case. Marcus, from the first days of his marriage, aspired to become the person he had always been before his failures, to return to his former success, to that sense of confidence and pride in himself that disappeared with his past life. For him, work was not just a way to make a living, it was a way to prove to himself that he was back at the top, that he had not only recovered, but also become a better person. And when he had the opportunity to move to a higher position, he jumped at it without a doubt. Keisha was happy for him. She had supported Marcus from the very beginning of their relationship, inspired him when he doubted himself, and was proud of how he was able to rise up after all his past defeats. But as Marcus's career grew, so did his obligations. The new job required more time, more effort, and most frustratingly, more of his absence from home. In the beginning, everything seemed quite manageable. Marcus still got up in the morning, went to work, and returned in the evening, but now his return home was accompanied by fatigue that he could not hide. His thoughts often stayed in the office, even when he was with Keisha. Gradually, dinners together became more and more rare, and conversations about something personal became more and more superficial. It all came down to discussing his work, her work, the news of the day. And that was it. No depth, no spark that once connected them. Keisha felt it first. She began to notice that despite Marcus's physical presence, his thoughts and emotions were somewhere far away in the world of his work and new ambitions. At first, she tried to ignore it, convincing herself that it was all temporary, that when Marcus settled into his new position, everything would return to normal. But every day it became more and more obvious that it was impossible to return to the old. Marcus was immersed in his work with his head. He started staying in the office longer, often coming home late at night. Sometimes he didn't have time for dinner at all, and Keisha ate alone, looking at the empty chair opposite. She tried to keep the house in order, tried to be an attentive and caring wife, but anxiety and discontent began to accumulate inside her. Her husband was gradually disappearing from her life, although physically he was still there. One day, when Marcus stayed at work until midnight again, Keisha was sitting on the couch looking at family photos. On one of them, they stood hugging each other, with beaming smiles on their faces, shortly after the wedding. This photo was taken on their first vacation together, when it seemed that everything would be easy and simple, that love is all that is needed for happiness. But now those smiles seemed distant and almost alien. When Marcus finally returned home, she was sitting in the dark living room, lit only by the phone screen. He entered quietly, trying not to make any noise, but Keisha heard his footsteps and looked up.
I'm sorry I'm late. Today was a hell of a day.
Keisha didn't answer right away. She sighed and turned off the phone.
You're always late.
Marcus was a little confused, not expecting such an answer.
I know. But I have to work. We've talked about this.
We talked about you finding a balance, that you won't let work consume you.
It's just temporary. I haven't settled into my new position yet. There are too many things to do.
Keisha shook her head.
You've been saying that for months now. Meanwhile, I feel like I'm losing you.
Marcus was silent. He knew there was truth in what she was saying, but he couldn't afford to admit it completely. For him, this job was everything. It was a chance to regain what he had lost, a chance to become who he once was. He couldn't afford to back down.
I'm doing this for us.
Keisha smiled bitterly.
But it seems that everything you do is for you. I understand that work is important, but you are no longer at home. You're here physically, but I don't feel your presence.
She got up from the sofa and went to the window, looking out at the dark street behind the glass. She hadn't felt so alone in a long time, even when they had just met and were just friends. Now, as his wife, she felt that she was moving further away from him every day.
I do not know how long I can tolerate this. I don't want to be that wife who waits for her husband late every night, not knowing if he will come on time. I don't want to be a woman whose life revolves around someone's career.
These words startled Marcus. He realized that he was too focused on his ambitions, on trying to regain his former glory and success, and completely lost sight of the most important thing, his wife. She, who had always been there for him, supported him in the most difficult moments, now felt forgotten and unnecessary.
I didn't want it to happen like this.
But it worked.
The next few weeks were difficult for them. Marcus tried to change his schedule by spending more time at home, but the stress at work kept him from relaxing. Every time he thought he could leave on time, a new problem arose that required his intervention. And Keisha became more and more withdrawn into herself. She was trying to do something of her own. At some point, Keisha began to devote more time to her own ambitions. Her work at the charity has always been important to her, but now she's thinking about how to make it more meaningful. She wanted more than just to be a part of someone else's project. She started dreaming about her own foundation, about how she could help people more effectively by doing things her own way. This idea grew in her more and more every day. Keisha realized that she couldn't just sit and wait for Marcus to find a balance between work and home. She needed something of her own, something that would bring her joy and satisfaction. So she started preparing to create her own project. It wasn't easy. She had worked for many years under the guidance of others. And now, having decided on her own business, she realized how many obstacles were in front of her. She worked in the evenings, looked through documents, and drew up a business plan. Keisha spent more and more time at the computer, discussing her ideas with colleagues and old acquaintances from charity circles. Her house became an office, and her life became a series of meetings and negotiations. She found something that gave her a sense of purpose, and that feeling seemed to compensate for her loneliness in her marriage. Marcus noticed that she was busy, but he was so immersed in his work that he didn't pay attention to it. It seemed to him that if Keisha found something that fascinated her, it was good. He did not understand that her new activity was not only a way for her to realize herself, but also an escape from their crumbling relationship. One evening, when they were sitting at dinner again in almost silence, Keisha looked up at Marcus. She wanted to talk, to tell him about her ideas and plans, but something stopped her. He was sitting looking at his phone, answering some work messages. She suddenly realized that this had become their new normal, two people who live together, but communicate less and less. Her disappointment became a heavy burden that she could no longer ignore.
Marcus, we need to talk.
Marcus looked up from the phone, surprised by her serious tone.
About what?
About us. We are moving away from each other. I feel like we've lost something important.
Marcus wanted to object, but realized she was right. He sighed and put the phone aside.
I feel it too, but I do not know how to fix it.
I'm not asking you to fix everything, but we have to try. We need to devote more time to each other, not just to work.
Marcus nodded, realizing that this was the moment of truth. It's been a few months since Marcus threw himself into his new job. Keisha, although she supported him, understood that their relationship was not what it used to be. She couldn't pinpoint exactly when the turning point occurred, but deep down she knew their lives had changed, and not for the better. Every day, Keisha went to work at her charity organization, as before. Everything was the same there, the same people, the same stories, the same problems. Her day began with listening to complaints, listening to requests, finding solutions for those in need, directing them to sources of help, and monitoring the implementation of projects. All this gave her satisfaction. She always knew that her job was important. But here's the problem: she didn't feel useful anymore. The job she had once adored now seemed like a chore to her. Previously, every day was a challenge filled with a sense of significance, and that she was making the world a better place. Now it has turned into an endless stream of monotonous tasks, as if on a conveyor belt. The same faces, the same problems. She listened to people's stories, but increasingly her attention began to wander. She heard, but she wasn't listening anymore. Her inner sense of satisfaction was gradually disappearing, and in its place came a feeling of emptiness. This feeling of disappointment began to grow inside her. Previously, Keisha had always been proud that her work helped people. She was the one who could help in the most difficult moment, and it made her life meaningful. But now her work no longer aroused the same emotions in her. She was trapped between duty and lack of joy. The daily chores that used to inspire her now seemed like a chore. Every morning when she came to the office, she forced herself to smile at colleagues and clients. She understood that outwardly everything looked the same, as always her attention to detail, caring for everyone in need, all this remained in place. But something else was going on inside her. She felt her heart gradually moving away from this work. And then one morning, sitting at her desk, Keisha suddenly realized that she had lost motivation. She was looking at the documents in front of her, but her thoughts were somewhere far away. All these years, she has been helping other people, trying to make their lives better, and that was her mission. But what about her own life? She gave her all, leaving nothing for herself. Where was she in this? Who was Keisha outside of her job and relationship with Marcus? These questions began to haunt her. Every day they returned to her, increasing her inner anxiety. Keisha understood that her life was locked in two aspects: her job and her marriage. And none of them brought her joy anymore. Her own desires and aspirations were left in the background. But what kind of desires were they? What did she want? Keisha had never really asked herself that question. She recalled her youthful dreams. Once upon a time, she dreamed of changing the world, doing something significant, memorable. At that time, charity seemed to her the ideal way to do this. She believed that she could change people's lives, help them find their place in the world. But now that faith has been shaken, no matter how hard she tried, people's problems remained the same. Has she really changed a lot in all this time? Or were her efforts simply dissolving into a sea of human suffering? Keisha started asking herself more and more questions. She realized that she could no longer continue in the same spirit as before. Her inner world demanded a change. She needed to find a new meaning, a new purpose. But how to do it? Where can I look for answers? These thoughts began to take over her mind more and more often. Her days were spent thinking about what she could have done differently. She was thinking about her future. Could she continue to work for charity if she no longer felt connected to it? Or did she need to radically change the direction of her life? Marcus was too busy with his career to notice what was going on with Keisha. She understood that she could not count on his support in these matters. He was focused on his job, on his ambitions. Their marriage became more and more formal, and Keisha increasingly felt lonely even in his presence. She tried not to blame him for that. He was just like that, a man who was looking to restore his former life through success. But she realized that she could no longer live for the sake of other people's goals. These internal torments led her to the idea that she had to create something. She began to think about starting her own business. It could have been the charitable foundation she had always dreamed of founding. She wanted a more flexible and independent structure that would allow her to implement her ideas without the restrictions imposed by working in someone else's organization. The thought of it haunted her. Keisha began to explore the possibilities of creating her own charitable foundation. She was thinking about what he could be like, how he would work. She was inspired for the first time in a long time. She felt that she could find a new meaning. She imagined how she could develop assistance programs that would match her ideals. Keisha saw how she could change the approach to charity, make it more personal, more focused on the individual needs of people, rather than on mass support. But with that inspiration came doubts. She was asking herself questions: will she be able to cope? Does she have enough experience? Is she ready to leave her comfort zone and start from scratch? Her frightening uncertainty stood in the way of realizing her plans. Keisha didn't know if she had the strength and determination to take this step. Her fears were well-founded. Her job was stable, and she couldn't just walk away from there. After all, that would mean giving up everything she had worked for so many years. And how would her colleagues and superiors react to her decision? But on the other hand, she couldn't stay where she was, feeling unhappy and unfulfilled, either. Every morning, Keisha got out of bed with the same feeling of insecurity. She was moving slowly along her usual schedule, but her thoughts were focused on the future. She was thinking about what her new business could be like, what steps needed to be taken to make it a reality. Plans, ideas, concepts were spinning in her head, but she was still afraid to take the first step. Over time, her internal conflict became more acute. Keisha understood that if she didn't change something in her life, she would simply die of inner disappointment. Her old passion for life and work was on the verge of disappearing. And that scared her the most. But even more terrifying was the thought that she would not be able to cope, that her ideas would remain just ideas, that she would not be able to make her dreams come true. This fear was like a shadow following her everywhere. He was forcing her to delay making a decision, to wait another day, another week. But the realization was growing inside her that she couldn't wait any longer. She began to wake up at night, thinking about what she needed to do. Her mind raced from one decision to another. She imagined what her own organization would look like, how it would work, how her projects would help people in a new way. But these dreams have always faced cold reality, the fear of failure, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of being left alone on this path. However, Keisha knew she needed to move forward. Her life couldn't stay in the same place anymore. The work that had once filled her with meaning no longer brought her joy. She could no longer ignore her own needs and aspirations. And then one day, at the end of a long day at work, when the office was already empty, Keisha made a decision. She will move forward. She'll make the first move, even if it's scary. She will begin to make her dreams come true, because she can no longer stand still. Her life was at a crossroads, and she chose the path of change. Keisha and Marcus never thought they could get to the point where their love would start to crack at the seams. At the very beginning of their journey, when they just started building a relationship, everything seemed clear, simple and right. But life always makes its own adjustments, and tension was building up between them every day. Their warm bond, which seemed unbreakable, began to weaken under the pressure of everyday worries, ambitions and internal contradictions. Time has passed, and those minor irritants that were once easily forgiven have now become a real problem. Previously, when Marcus was late at work, Keisha could turn a blind eye to it, thinking that it was temporary, that it was just a phase. But now his constant absences have become the norm. Their evenings together, when they discussed their dreams and plans, have now given way to silence. More and more often, Keisha dined alone, her thoughts plunged into a void that she could no longer ignore. Marcus, in turn, felt increasingly detached. He was absorbed in his career, his achievements, which finally began to bear fruit. It seemed to him that he was doing everything right, he was working for the future, he was trying for both of them. But deep down, he knew that something was slipping away. He noticed changes in Keisha. Her looks became colder, and the smile that once illuminated his days became a rarity. This tension accumulated slowly, like water filling a vessel. None of them wanted to admit to themselves that something was going wrong. They both tried to maintain a semblance of normality, avoiding serious conversations that could lead to conflict. But no matter how hard they tried, the truth began to show through the thin shell of their marriage. Keisha spent more and more time alone. Her project to create her own charitable foundation was progressing, but it was more like running away than striving to realize a dream. She saw it as an opportunity to escape from reality, from the loneliness that was slowly but surely filling her heart. Every new meeting, every new step to create her foundation seemed to her a chance to start all over again, not only in work, but also in life. But the more she went into work, the more she felt a void that no amount of professional success could fill. Marcus wasn't happy either. Yes, his career began to take off, but every day he felt more and more lonely. He understood that his relationship with Keisha had changed, but he couldn't figure out how and why it happened. It seemed to him that everything he was doing was for the sake of their common future. But then why did he feel that this future was becoming more and more hazy? One evening, when Keisha returned home late, exhausted after a long day of meetings and discussions, she discovered that Marcus was not at home again. It wasn't the first time lately, and before, she would have just ignored it, busied herself with work or just rested alone. But this time, something inside her snapped. Her patience, which had been tested by time, could no longer stand it. She stood in the empty living room, feeling a dull rage building inside her. It seemed to her that this house, which had once been their common place of comfort and safety, had turned into an empty shell. They lived here, but it was like two parallel worlds. Keisha no longer felt connected to Marcus, and this realization brought her unbearable pain. When Marcus returned, late at night, he was exhausted, as always. His thoughts were on work, on the tasks he had not completed, and on what he had to do the next day. But when he entered the house, he immediately felt the tension in the air. It was almost a physical sensation, as if the air had become heavier. He knew something was wrong, but he wasn't ready for what was going on inside Keisha. Keisha was standing in the kitchen, not touching her dinner. Her thoughts were clouded by anger and disappointment. She could no longer hide what was accumulating inside her. It seemed to her that she could no longer wait for something to change. All those moments when she felt forgotten, lonely, and unnecessary flashed through her mind. It seemed to her that her life no longer belonged to herself, that she had dissolved into routine, into other people's ambitions, in anticipation of something that would never happen. Marcus entered the kitchen, saw her tense figure, and realized that this evening would not be the same as usual. Something had to happen. They could no longer ignore what had been smoldering between them for a long time. Keisha felt a wave of emotions boiling inside her. She couldn't keep quiet anymore, couldn't hide her feelings anymore. It hurt her that their life had become the way it was now. Her heart ached at the thought that they had once been happy, but now it all seemed far away and out of reach. She could no longer live in this state, in a state of constant expectation that everything would work out by itself. Marcus, feeling tense, started thinking about how to fix the situation, but his thoughts were chaotic. He didn't understand what exactly went wrong. It seemed to him that he was doing everything possible to ensure their future, but then why was Keisha so unhappy? Why wasn't she smiling at him like she used to? It seemed to him that he was losing her, but he did not know how to hold on to what had already begun to crumble. And so when Keisha's emotions reached the limit, an explosion occurred. She couldn't keep everything to herself anymore. All the accumulated pain, resentment, disappointment poured out. It was like a storm that had been gathering for a long time, and now broke out with such force that Marcus was caught off guard. Her accusations, her pain, her words hit him like blows. He didn't know how to react, how to protect himself from this flood of emotions. His first reaction was to defend himself, to find excuses, to explain that he was doing everything for their common good. But deep down, he understood it won't help. Their problems went deeper than just fatigue or work. It was something more, something that both of them had overlooked. Keisha felt that she had finally said something that had been gnawing at her for a long time. But instead of relief, she felt only an even greater emptiness. She realized that words could not fix what had been destroyed. Her pain was too deep to just disappear after she vented her emotions. She understood that their problems would not be solved overnight, that there were still many trials ahead of them. Marcus was stunned. He stood in front of her, feeling helpless. Everything he thought was right now seemed like a mistake to him. He understood that he had missed the moment when he could have changed something, when he could have prevented this crisis. But now that everything had already happened, he didn't know how to take it all back. Their quarrel became a point of no return. This was the first time they had faced such a strong conflict, when their feelings had spilled out with such force. But with that came the realization that they could no longer ignore their problems. Their relationship was on the edge of a precipice, and it only depended on them whether they could find a way back or everything would collapse completely. Keisha went to her room, leaving Marcus alone. Her thoughts were full of bitterness and disappointment. She didn't know how they had come to this point, but she knew one thing: it couldn't go on like this. Her life, her dreams, her feelings were all under threat, and she could no longer live in expectation that someone else would solve her problems. Marcus remained standing in the kitchen, feeling lost. He knew he had to say something, do something to fix the situation. But there was an emptiness inside him, and he couldn't find the words. Everything he thought was important now seemed insignificant. His work, his achievements, all this paled before the fact that he could lose the most precious thing in his life. And that night, when both were left alone with their thoughts, they realized that they were facing a choice. Either they start working on themselves and their relationship, or their marriage will collapse. After that tense night when the quarrel had shaken them both to the core, the silence that enveloped the house seemed even more frightening. A silence that did not bring relief, but only emphasized how far they had moved away from each other. And if earlier there was an invisible wall of petty resentments and misunderstandings between them, now this wall has become real, tangible. They could physically feel her presence. They both understood that they could no longer ignore the problems. They could not dismiss what had been accumulating inside for years. Now it had all come out, and they had to decide what to do next. Keisha couldn't calmly think about what had happened. The quarrel was the culmination of everything she had been carrying for so long. Every moment, every little thing that had seemed insignificant before, now surfaced in her memory with renewed vigor. She couldn't forget how lonely she felt, even when Marcus was around. The memory of those evenings when she waited for him at home, hoping that today they could just talk, still burned her. But he came in late, exhausted from work, and they didn't even have time for simple conversations. Their life together no longer brought her joy. Her inner voice told her that she deserved real partnership, real intimacy. But did they have the opportunity to return it? Marcus, in turn, was experiencing his own inner struggle. He couldn't believe that they had reached such a point. In his mind, everything was different. He was working to ensure that they both had a good future, so that they could live better than before. He always believed that he was doing everything right, achieving success, growing in his career. But the more he delved into his work, the more he moved away from real life, from Keisha. He only realized this now that he saw her pain, which she had been hiding for so long. For Marcus, this moment was a revelation. He has always considered himself a strong, purposeful man who knows how to cope with difficulties. But that evening he realized that his strength was not helping him in a relationship. His single-mindedness in his career has become his weakness in marriage. He had put his ambitions above their relationship, above her needs, and only now realized how much he had hurt her. It seemed to him that he had betrayed her trust, her love, because he could not understand her pain. And now the question arose in front of him what to do next. Did they have a chance to rebuild what was destroyed? The following days passed in silence. Both were trying to cope with their emotions, to think about everything that had happened. It wasn't easy. Keisha went to work with a heavy heart, and every morning she felt something in her shrink at the thought of what would happen in the evening. Her life was no longer the same as before. Her own ambitions, her dreams of a charitable foundation, which until recently seemed so important, have now faded against the background of their family problems. All she wanted was to regain the sense of closeness and support that they had once shared. But she didn't know how to do it. Marcus, on the other hand, was also deep in thought. His work, which used to be the meaning of his existence, now seemed meaningless to him. He couldn't concentrate on the tasks anymore. His thoughts kept returning to Keisha. It seemed to him that if he didn't change something in their relationship now, he would lose her forever. But how do I find the right words? How do I start a conversation that could get them back on the right track? These questions haunted him. Eventually, after several days of silence, the tension between them reached a critical point. They both knew they couldn't avoid talking anymore. Keisha came home after work. Her thoughts were heavy and vague. She knew she had to say something, but she couldn't find the strength to start. However, Marcus couldn't wait any longer. He felt that if they didn't talk now, there wouldn't be a chance anymore. When they finally sat down together, the silence between them seemed louder than any conversation. It was something they both feared, but they knew it was necessary. They didn't know where to start, but they knew that this conversation would be crucial. Marcus was the first to think that he had lost his ability to listen. Once he could sit with Keisha for hours, just discussing her feelings, her thoughts. But now he realized that he had stopped doing it. He stopped being the person for her to share her feelings with. He focused on his work, believing that it was important for their common future, but did not realize that the most important thing was their present, their bond, their relationship. Keisha, in turn, realized that her fears and frustrations had accumulated due to the fact that she herself had also become distant. She believed that if she waited patiently, Marcus would figure out what she needed. But she couldn't expect him to guess her thoughts. Her silence was as devastating as his absence. She realized that instead of talking about her feelings, she was storing them up inside, and this only increased the tension. When they started discussing their feelings, it wasn't an easy conversation. Both understood that their problems were deeper than it seemed at first glance. Keisha felt betrayed, but at the same time realized that her own expectations and fears also played a role in their separation. Marcus, in turn, saw how his ambition and pursuit of success made him blind to what was going on in their marriage. They both realized that their problems could not be solved overnight. But the most important thing that became clear was that they were both ready to work on it. Keisha, despite her pain, realized that she still loves Marcus. She couldn't just let him go because their love was still alive, even though it had suffered a lot. She was ready to work on their relationship, but she needed to see that Marcus was also ready to change. Marcus realized that he needed to rethink his priorities. His career could no longer come first, because if he lost Keisha, no amount of success at work would be able to compensate for that loss. He was ready to take a step back to rebuild what had collapsed. He needed to show Keisha that he was ready to listen, that he was ready to be a real partner for her, and not just a person who comes home late and brings fatigue and irritation with him. And so, as they talked, they began to make a plan. Not a plan that would include some grandiose changes or promises, but a simple plan how to return intimacy, how to return understanding. They both agreed that it was necessary to start small. Marcus decided that he would try to come home earlier so that he could spend more time with Keisha. Keisha, in turn, decided that it would be more honest to talk about her feelings without waiting for them to accumulate to an explosive state. They understood that it would be a long journey. Their trust has been undermined, their bond weakened, but they were still together, and it gave them hope. Both realized that love is not just a feeling, but a job. A job that needs to be done every day, regardless of fatigue or stress. And now they were ready to start this work again. The next few weeks were a period of gradual recovery for them. They began to spend more time with each other, discussing not only their work, but also their feelings, their dreams. Marcus gradually reduced his immersion in his career, finding time for his personal life. Keisha, in turn, began to think more about how to maintain a balance between her ambitions and their relationship. This process has not been easy. Both of them were still struggling with their inner demons. Keisha continued to feel fear that her dreams might remain unfulfilled, and Marcus was still under pressure at work. But now they were on the same side. Now they knew that they could discuss their problems and find solutions together, not alone. They started going out more in the evenings, as they used to do when they first started dating. These walks became a time for them when they could talk without interruptions, without fuss. Gradually, their conversations became more open, more sincere. They talked not only about what bothered them, but also about what brought joy. It became their way of restoring lost intimacy. And although the problems hadn't completely disappeared, they now had the confidence that they could handle them together. Rebuilding a relationship after a crisis is always a difficult and slow process. Keisha and Marcus knew that they had a long way to go, and that nothing would change quickly. But they also realized that the main thing was their willingness to work on themselves and their relationships. The love that had once united them still lived in their hearts, although it was weakened by pain, misunderstanding, and accumulated resentments. It was important not to forget what they had started this journey for, and now they were ready to start a new chapter in their lives. The first step towards recovery was the realization that every decision, every act, every action in their marriage matters. These were not some great gestures or grand promises, but little things that added up to everyday life. Keisha and Marcus have started to pay more attention to how they relate to each other. Every morning now began not just with a quick good morning, but real attention to each other. They began to take small but important steps to regain the warmth that once bound them. Keisha no longer expected Marcus to figure out what was happening to her on his own. She has learned to express her feelings and desires directly, without fear of being misunderstood or rejected. It was important not to hide your emotions, but to share them, even if it was difficult. It was a lesson she had learned after their serious conversation. Now she tried to talk about what was bothering her before the little things turned into big problems. Her willingness to open dialogue was the key to the new relationship they were building together. Marcus, in turn, realized that his job is not the only important thing in his life. He used to think that his career achievements could compensate for everything else, that if he succeeded, he would automatically make them both happy. But now he understood that success at work cannot replace intimacy and understanding in a relationship. He learned how to balance work and personal life, finding time for Keisha and for himself. It wasn't easy, especially in the first weeks, when old habits kept coming back. But Marcus was determined to change his attitude, and it was evident in his every action. Their lives have become more measured. There were no more constant stresses associated with the fact that one of them was absorbed in his own affairs, and the other felt forgotten. They began to find joy in simple things, watching movies together, cooking dinners, walking in the park. These moments have become more than just a pastime for them. It was their way of reminding each other that they were important, that their bond was still alive. Keisha, continuing to develop her charity foundation project, found in this not only professional satisfaction, but also a way to restore her inner harmony. She realized that her desire to help others is part of her essence, but she must not forget about herself. The creation of the foundation gave her the opportunity to control her time and energy, which helped to maintain a balance between work and personal life. Her ambitions no longer seemed like something that threatened her relationship with Marcus. On the contrary, she realized that she could be successful and at the same time happy in marriage. Marcus, in turn, reconsidered his attitude to success. He no longer aspired to career heights at any cost. His priorities have changed. Now it was important for him not just to seek new positions or large incomes, but to find meaning in what he was doing and maintain intimacy with Keisha. His work was still an important part of his life, but now it did not occupy all his time and thoughts. He learned to let go of control, to allow himself to be imperfect, and this gave him a sense of inner peace. They started traveling more. Traveling has become a way for them not only to see new places, but also to get closer, get away from the daily routine and rediscover each other. They planned their trips together, chose destinations, and discussed what they wanted to see and experience. It became a new tradition that filled their lives with joy and inspiration. Keisha and Marcus were able to feel again that they are a team that can overcome any difficulties. During their travels, they found time for long walks, during which they discussed their plans for the future. Keisha shared her ideas on how to develop her charitable foundation, and Marcus talked about how he sees his professional future without those ambitions that once obscured everything else for him. These conversations helped them understand each other better, making their relationship deeper. Keisha has learned to let go of her pursuit of perfectionism. Previously, she always wanted everything to be perfect, both at work and in her personal life. But now she has realized that the ideal is a myth, and that it is important to accept yourself and your life as they are. She realized that her relationship with Marcus couldn't be perfect, but that didn't make it any less valuable. She stopped demanding things from herself and Marcus that were impossible to achieve, and it brought her inner relief. Marcus has also learned to let go of expectations. He stopped trying to keep everything in his life under control. Now he knew that sometimes you just have to let things take their course, not try to control every little thing. This freedom gave him the opportunity to feel more relaxed and satisfied. He no longer worried about the fact that he might not always be the perfect husband or a successful professional. He accepted his weaknesses, and it made him stronger. Their new chapter in life was not about achieving the ideal, but about accepting imperfections and learning to love each other despite them. They no longer expected their relationship to be perfect, like in movies or books. Now they understood that real love is about daily work, understanding, acceptance, and willingness to support each other in difficult moments. Keisha no longer felt the loneliness that had haunted her for so long. She no longer felt forgotten or unwanted. Now she knew that Marcus was really there, that he could hear her, see her, support her. This gave her confidence not only in the relationship but also in herself. She has learned to value herself and her achievements without seeking approval from the outside. Her charitable foundation had become a source of inspiration for her, but now she didn't let her work completely consume her. She found the balance she had been looking for a long time. Marcus, in turn, felt that he was no longer running after a phantom success. He found what really mattered to him: the closeness with Keisha, their joint plans for the future, their travels, their conversations. His life no longer seemed to him like a race for achievements, but became a journey full of discoveries and joys. He stopped comparing himself with others, stopped striving to prove something to someone. Now he knew that the most important thing was to live in the moment, be with those he loves, and enjoy what he already has. A sense of comfort and security reigned in their house again. Now it was not just a place where they lived together, but also their common space in which they built their lives. Marcus began to help more around the house, paying attention to those things that previously seemed unimportant to him. Keisha, in turn, began to appreciate their moments together more, realizing that every day is an opportunity to make their relationship even stronger. Their marriage had been through serious trials, but now they felt stronger. They realized that love is not just a feeling that comes and goes, but a conscious choice that needs to be made every day. They chose each other and were ready to work on their relationship, no matter what difficulties might arise in the future. This new chapter in their lives was full of hope and confidence. Keisha and Marcus knew that new challenges lay ahead, but now they were ready to face them together. They were not only husband and wife, but also partners who supported each other in every aspect of life. And although their path was far from ideal, they learned to appreciate it for what it is. Now their lives had become more fulfilling, more meaningful. They both changed during the time they spent together, and these changes made their bond even stronger. Every morning they woke up with the confidence that, despite all the difficulties they had gone through, they could overcome any new challenges. Now they knew that together they were capable of anything. Their new chapter was just beginning. When their first serious fight was over, Keisha and Marcus fell into agonizing thoughts. Like a broken clock, their lives stopped at the moment when they both realized that something had gone wrong. These were no longer just minor misunderstandings that could be swept under the carpet like old dust. Now they faced a real threat, the destruction of what they had built with such difficulty. Keisha, sitting in the bedroom with the door closed, felt like she was trapped in her own life. She has always been distinguished by the desire for order, for clarity in everything from work to relationships. But now her inner world turned upside down. She felt disappointed and tired. The love that had seemed indestructible was now under threat, and all she could do was sit and replay in her head every moment of their quarrel, every word said or not said. Marcus wasn't in the best condition either. He stayed on the couch in the living room. His eyes were glued to the TV, but his thoughts were wandering somewhere far away. They hadn't fought like that in a long time. Yes, minor quarrels, discontents, it was all like any couple, but not like that. This quarrel, like a lightning strike, split them into two parts. Keisha's voice sounded in his head, her words hitting his ego and pride. He replayed over and over the moment when she said she didn't want to live like this anymore, that her loneliness had become unbearable. Marcus couldn't help but admit that she was right. He became too involved in his work, his career, leaving their relationship somewhere in the background of his life. It seemed to him that everything was going according to plan. He was making money, building a career, and therefore Keisha would be happy. But he was wrong. His ambitions, which had seemed so important to him before, now looked small compared to what he could lose.
Why should I put up with this?
She whispered to herself as she lay on the bed. Her eyes were fixed on the ceiling, as if there was an answer to all her questions.
Is this the life we dreamed of? When did it all become like this?
She closed her eyes, trying to remember the days when everything was simpler. They were young, in love, and it seemed to her that the whole world lay at their feet. They dreamed, made plans for the future, laughed at trifles and believed that together they could cope with anything. But now everything seemed somehow faded, as if reality had washed away the colors of their relationship. Instead of carefree conversations about the future, they talked only about what was wrong, and every conversation turned into a clash. Marcus was sitting on the couch, his head was down, and his hands were clutching the TV remote control, although he had not looked at the screen for a long time. His thoughts went back to the evening when they first had a serious conversation about their feelings. Keisha then confessed to him that she feels lonely, despite the fact that they live under the same roof. He didn't think much of it at the time, writing off her words as fatigue and stress from work. But now it was clear he was just ignoring the problem.
I'm an idiot, he said under his breath. How could I miss it? I can see how hard it is for her. Why didn't I stop and talk to her like I used to?
He got up from the sofa and went to the window. A quiet night street stretched behind the glass. The whole world seemed to be asleep except for him. He stared at the dim light of the lanterns, but Keisha's words were spinning in his head. She said that she could no longer tolerate his constant delays at work, that she lacked attention and warmth. But how could he fix it? After all, his work was an important part of their lives. He wanted them to live in prosperity so that she could be proud of him. But thinking about it, Marcus realized that the problem was not how much money he was making or what success he was achieving at work. The problem was that he had forgotten about her, about their life together, about the fact that they were a team. Work occupied all his time and thoughts, and he stopped noticing her needs. Meanwhile, Keisha couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. She had always believed that love was more than just being there for her. She wanted to be heard, understood. But every day she felt that Marcus was getting further away from her. Their conversations turned into an exchange of short phrases. Her dreams of living together, of having children, of building their future together, seemed so far away and illusory now. She went to the window and looked at the stars. As a child, she often wondered, looking at the night sky, made wishes, believed that her future would be bright and happy. But now she couldn't understand how things had become so complicated. Keisha didn't believe in fairy tales anymore, but she desperately wanted to believe that her story with Marcus wasn't over yet. It's been a few days since their fight. They both remained silent, avoiding conversation. The whole house was filled with a silence that was becoming unbearable. Both Keisha and Marcus understood that this could not go on for long, but neither of them dared to take the first step. One evening, when Keisha returned from work, Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into space. He looked up as she entered, and their eyes met. They stared at each other for a moment, not knowing what to say. There was tension in the air, but at that moment Marcus felt that if he didn't say anything now, they could completely lose each other.
Keisha, we need to talk.
Her heart sank, but she knew this conversation was inevitable. She nodded silently and sat down opposite him. There was silence in the room, but not the silence they were already used to, but a silence in which an important moment was brewing.
I understand that I screwed up a lot. I can see that you feel bad. But I do not know how to fix it. I'm really trying, but he paused, not knowing how to continue.
Keisha looked at him and her eyes softened. She could see that he was genuinely trying to understand her. But she also knew that desire alone was not enough.
I don't want you to fix everything alone. I just want you to be there for me. I don't need your decisions or excuses. I need your attention, your participation. We're not talking anymore, Marcus. Have you noticed?
Marcus nodded, knowing she was right.
I know. I didn't know that I had started everything like that. It seemed to me that I was doing everything right. A job, a career, it's important. I wanted us to have a future.
What about the real one? Have you ever thought about it? The future is not something that will happen by itself. It needs to be built here and now. You got so carried away with your work that you forgot about us, about our relationship. I don't need more money. I need you to be with me. We're a team, aren't we?
These words sounded to Marcus like a blow to the very heart. He never thought about the fact that his desire for success could cause the destruction of their relationship. It seemed to him that it was all for the sake of both of them, for the sake of their future. But now he saw that all this had led to them becoming strangers.
You're right. I got too carried away with my work and completely forgot about you, about us. I didn't want it to happen like this.
Keisha lowered her head, her hands nervously twisting the edge of her sleeve. She felt that this conversation was important. Young was for both of them, but at the same time she didn't know how to fix what had already been destroyed.
Marcus, I don't want to live in such silence anymore. It's killing me. I feel like we're losing each other, and it's scary. But I do not know how we can return to what was before.
Marcus stared at her, feeling like he was losing her. And that was the worst thing for him. He realized that their relationship was not something that was taken for granted. This is something that needs to be worked on every day, no matter how corny it may sound.
I don't want to lose you. I'm ready to work on it. We'll do it, Keisha, I promise.
Their conversation ended, but this time the silence was different. Now it was the silence not of despair, but of hope. After their first serious conversation, in which Marcus and Keisha laid out all the accumulated resentments and worries, it seemed that the ice between them began to crack. But to say one thing and to do it is quite another. Both understood that one conversation would not solve all their problems. But this conversation was the very first step that they had been putting off for so long. Now they had to move from words to actions. Marcus knew that things wouldn't change overnight. He has always been a man who is used to solving problems quickly, reducing everything to simple tasks, whether it's a job or a relationship. But this time he realized that he would not be able to solve this issue the way he was used to. Their relationship has become more complicated than ever. Keisha was right, he had really forgotten about them, immersed in his career. But how can they return to the intimacy they have lost? How to become not only husband and wife again, but also a team? Keisha was also in a state of internal struggle. She wanted to believe that their relationship could be saved, but part of her was full of doubts. It was hard for her to forget about the pain she had been experiencing all these months. Yes, Marcus promised that everything would change, that he would devote more time to their marriage. But will he actually be able to change his habits? Or is this another promise that will disappear into thin air, like many others? A week has passed since their conversation. A week full of strained calm. Marcus really tried. He came home from work earlier than usual, cooked dinner, or at least helped Keisha around the house. He tried to communicate with her more, to ask questions about her work, to be interested in her project. But every time he tried to make contact, it was like there was an invisible wall between them. Keisha answered his questions, but her answers were short, as if she was afraid to get involved in a deep conversation again, which could ruin everything.
Thanks for dinner. Day.
She put her fork down on her plate, trying not to look at Marcus.
It was delicious.
I'm glad you liked it.
His voice was soft, but he couldn't help but notice the coldness in her tone.
I tried my best. Mace.
She nodded, not knowing what else to say. There was an awkward silence in the room. Marcus could feel his own insecurity growing. He is not used to such situations where emotional subtlety decides everything, not logic and facts. Usually in life, he just acted if something didn't work. He changed his approach. But here it was different.
Keisha.
He finally began, after a long silence.
I know that just coming home early is not the solution. But I want to show you that I'm ready to change. I'm ready to be here for us, not just for work.
I can see that you're trying, Marcus.
She replied, finally looking up at him.
But it's not just about coming early. I feel like we've lost something important. I used to be able to talk to you about everything. And now I'm afraid that if we start talking, everything will fall apart again.
Marcus felt his heart tighten at her words. He knew she was right. During these months he had become so deeply involved in his own affairs that he had simply forgotten about her feelings. And now his task was not just to spend time, but to regain the trust that they had lost.
I understand what you're talking about.
He got up from the table and went to the window, trying to collect his thoughts.
I'm scared too. It's scary that we won't be able to get back what we had anymore. But Keisha, if we don't try, we'll definitely lose it. And I don't want that.
She stared at him, feeling her doubts eating away at her from the inside. Marcus's words sounded sincere, but her fear of possible failure was so great that she didn't know if she should open up again. Her heart couldn't take another disappointment.
I just don't want to relive what happened before.
Her voice was low, but there was deep pain in it.
I'm so tired, Marcus. I'm tired of waiting for things to get better. I'm tired of hoping that you'll finally notice how I feel. I don't want to go through this again.
Marcus returned to the table and sat down across from her. He took her hand, feeling her tremble.
I realize that I missed a lot. And I realize that my words don't mean anything right now unless they are followed by action. But Keisha, I really want things to change. I want to get back what we had. And I'm ready to work on it.
She looked at his hand resting on her palm. Her mind was resisting, but her heart was telling a different story. She still loved him, despite the pain, despite all the disappointments, and she wanted to believe that they could handle it. But this fear, it was so great.
I do not know if I can trust you again.
These words sounded like a confession of one's own weakness. She never thought that their relationship would reach a point where trust would become a question that needed to be answered. But she understood that without it, they would not be able to move on.
I know.
He squeezed her hand tighter.
I will prove it to you every day. I don't expect you to forgive me for everything right away, but if you give me a chance, I will do everything so that you can trust me again.
Keisha looked into his eyes, and at that moment her fears began to ease a little. She saw a determination in him that she hadn't noticed before. Perhaps he really realized how much he had offended her. And maybe this time will be different. She nodded slowly, as if giving him this chance, although deep down she still doubted. The next few days were an ordeal for them. Marcus did his best to show Keisha that he had changed. He tried not only to be physically present, but also to be emotionally close. For the first time in a long time, he began to be interested in her life, her feelings, her thoughts. He asked questions about her work, about her project, which she had been preparing for so long, but still did not dare to start.
How are things going with your foundation? Have you decided when you're going to start?
Keisha was surprised by his interest. He had never shown much attention to her charity work before, considering it something secondary. But now his question sounded sincere, and she felt that he really wanted to hear her answer.
I'm still thinking about it. I need more time to prepare. This is a serious step, and I don't want to take it hastily.
Marcus nodded, realizing that this was really important to her.
I am sure that you will succeed. You've always been the best at what you do.
These words brought a smile to Keisha that she hadn't felt in a long time. She suddenly realized that she missed such moments when he said nice things to her, when he supported her, when she felt that he was there, not only physically, but also emotionally. It was like a breath of fresh air after a long immersion in routine and loneliness. But despite all this, they both knew that this was only the beginning of the journey. Marcus tried, but he still had to learn not to fall back into old habits. Work still took up most of his time and energy, and it was difficult for him to keep a balance between his career and family life. Every day was a new challenge for both of them. One evening, as they were sitting in the living room after dinner, Keisha felt that this was the right moment for a deeper conversation. It was important for her to discuss their future with Marcus, not only the nearest, but also more distant. She wanted to know that they had a common plan, common goals.
Marcus, I've been wanting to talk to you about our future for a long time. What do you think about what's going to happen next?
He was a little confused by her question. His thoughts were always focused on the present, on solving problems here and now. But he realized that Keisha was thinking deeper.
I didn't think about it that far. I'm more focused on fixing our present. But I understand that you need to know what awaits us next.
She nodded, waiting for him to continue.
I want us to have a future where we both will be happy, where you can do your foundation and I can do my job, but at the same time we will be together, supporting each other. I don't want work to become a barrier between us again. I want to learn how to find a balance so that we can build our relationship further.
These words gave Keisha some comfort. She could see that Marcus was serious about his intentions. And although they had a long way to go, she began to believe that they could walk it together. A few more weeks have passed. Marcus continued to work on himself, and although sometimes he plunged back into work with his head, he always returned to what was really important to him, their relationship. Keisha, in turn, began to open up to him more and more, not being afraid to talk about her feelings and needs. She realized that honesty and openness are the only way to restore trust. They began planning their future together, discussing how they would support each other in professional and personal endeavors. Keisha devoted more and more time to her foundation, and Marcus was happy to help her with whatever he could. Together, they gradually rebuilt the bridges that they had once destroyed with their ambitions and misunderstandings. These were only the first steps, but they became a guarantee that their relationship could be revived. After the first tentative steps towards reconciliation, which began with discussing their feelings and trying to devote more time to each other, Marcus and Keisha began to gradually restore the lost threads of communication. However, their further journey was not easy. Despite the efforts of both to regain their former intimacy, they faced new challenges. There was so much tension and misunderstanding in their relationship that the desire to fix everything was not enough. Marcus, who is used to solving problems rationally, is faced with the fact that not everything in their relationship lends itself to logic and analysis. He was always sure that if you make an effort and build a plan, you can fix any situation. But the relationship with Keisha required a different approach. He had to learn to really listen to her and be emotionally involved in their dialogues. It was not an easy process for Marcus, who was used to hiding his emotions and focusing on external successes rather than internal problems. Keisha, for her part, was still feeling the effects of her disappointment. Her years of waiting for attention, when she felt forgotten and unwanted, left a deep mark. Even with the apparent improvement in their relationship, it was difficult for her to fully trust Marcus. She continued to live with the inner fear that all their recent efforts were a temporary phenomenon that would disappear as soon as Marcus went back to work or faced another crisis in the professional field. Returning to the dialogue between them required mutual work on themselves. Keisha tried to overcome her closed state and learn to speak openly about her emotions again, despite the fear of being misunderstood or rejected. She had to remind herself that dialogue is not only an exchange of opinions, but also a manifestation of vulnerability, which she avoided after their breakup. Previously, she preferred to keep quiet and hope that Marcus would figure out what she needed. But this approach had led them to a dead end, and she could no longer afford such tactics. One of the main difficulties was that both understood how difficult it was to speak frankly, without returning to accusations and claims. Each of them felt to some extent like a victim of circumstances. Keisha suffered from loneliness and misunderstanding, and Marcus from the pressure and expectations that were placed on him. However, they both knew that in order for their relationship to work again, they would have to speak openly, but without attacks, and with understanding of each other. This new stage in their communication began with a discussion of everyday details. Marcus tried to pay more attention not only to big issues, like their plans for the future, but also to those details that previously seemed insignificant to him. He began to be interested in her thoughts about everyday things, how her day went, what news was in her project, what she was facing at work. It became important to be able to ask questions not for the sake of a tick, but with a sincere interest in her life. Keisha, for her part, was learning not to take his interest as a duty. She was trying to trust what Marcus really wanted to know about her life, and not just doing her marital duty. Their conversations began to slowly turn from an exchange of facts into real conversations, where both could share not only the events of the day, but also their experiences, thoughts, and plans. The old silence in their house, when each of them withdrew into himself, gradually gave way to a more lively interaction. At first, such conversations were rare, but they increasingly found time to have a heart-to-heart conversation. This did not mean that they immediately became an ideal couple, but every step towards dialogue strengthened their trust in each other. Keisha, inspired by Marcus's support, began to devote more and more time to her charity foundation project. Previously, she had been held back by doubts about her own abilities and the fear that Marcus would not support her initiative. Now that their relationship had begun to recover, she felt confident that she could realize her dreams. Her work with charity had always brought her deep satisfaction, and now she could share her plans with her husband without feeling that her ambitions were just her business. Marcus, in turn, tried to support her and not interfere in her decisions, which was a new task for him. Nevertheless, despite their efforts, the old habits still reminded them of themselves. There were days when Marcus, tired after work, would withdraw into himself again and did not find time to communicate. This was alarming for Keisha, who was beginning to worry that everything was going back to normal. She fought the temptation to make claims right away, trying instead to find a way to talk calmly and discuss what was bothering her. At such moments, they both faced a challenge: how to stay open with each other, despite fatigue, disagreements, or discontent. Every time one of them shut down, the other felt fear of repeating the past. But they both tried not to get offended, but to talk about their feelings, albeit through force. It was a difficult process that required patience and mutual respect. Over time, their dialogues became more and more profound. They began to discuss not only their daily affairs, but also those things that previously seemed too difficult or painful to discuss. Keisha shared with Marcus her fears about their marriage, as well as her professional ambitions. She told him about how she had doubted herself and her abilities for a long time, how she was afraid that her project would turn out to be a failure, and how she felt a lack of support from him. These confessions were an important step for her, as she had previously been afraid of appearing weak and dependent. Marcus, in turn, began to talk about his own doubts and fears, which he had been hiding until now. He shared how much he felt the pressure at work, how he was afraid that if he did not constantly prove his professional worth, he would lose the respect of colleagues and superiors. He admitted that he sometimes felt like a failure, despite all his achievements, and that this was what made him so deeply immersed in his work. These revelations brought them closer together. Keisha realized that Marcus was suffering too, just expressing his feelings in a different way. Over time, they began to understand each other better. Marcus realized that his work was important, but should not take up all his attention if it threatened their relationship. Keisha realized that she needed not only to expect support from Marcus, but also to learn to support him in difficult moments herself. Their relationship began to be based on mutual trust and understanding, rather than expectations and claims. However, the path to restoring dialogue has been long and thorny. There were times when it seemed easier for both of them to return to their usual patterns of behavior, but each time they tried to remind themselves that they had already gone too far to ruin everything again. They both knew that there was still a lot of work ahead, but every step towards open communication gave them the strength to move on. The return to dialogue became the most important stage in their life together. Now they not only talked to each other, but also listened, heard and understood. It was a slow process, but every step in that direction helped them get closer. After Marcus and Keisha began to return the dialogue to their relationship, they realized that this was not enough. They both knew that in order for their marriage to reach a new level, real actions, compromises and changes in daily life were required. Mutual concessions were the next step on their way to restoring their lost intimacy. From the very beginning, Keisha felt that her personal boundaries were often violated due to Marcus' chaotic lifestyle. She was used to order and organization, and his disorder and unwillingness to pay attention to small things annoyed her from the very beginning. Now, after numerous conversations, she began to understand that it is necessary to accept a partner with all his characteristics without requiring him to fully meet his expectations. That didn't mean she had to silently put up with the mess, but Keisha realized that you can't expect an instantaneous change in a person. She began to learn to be more tolerant, realizing that his habits were not a sign of disrespect, but simply part of his character. On the other hand, Marcus understood that in order to make Keisha happy, he would have to work harder on himself. It had never been easy for him to keep order and keep track of the little things, but now he realized that it was important to her. Gradually, he began to pay more attention to what previously seemed unimportant to him. He tried not to throw things around, wash dishes on time, and help around the house. It was a difficult step for Marcus because his schedule at work was still stressful, but he concluded for himself that the comfort of home and the atmosphere were part of their shared happiness. And now he sincerely wanted Keisha to feel comfortable in their home. The concessions concerned not only domestic issues. Keisha, who was used to being a leader in organizing her work time and personal space, began to realize that she could not control everything in their relationship. She had to realize that Marcus also had his own priorities and his own life, and she could not demand that he completely obey her rules. This was an important discovery for her to let go of some of the control and let him be himself, without expecting constant ideal behavior. She used to often take his mistakes and missteps as personal grievances, but now she began to understand that it was not worth taking everything personally. Marcus was undergoing his own internal changes. There was always a race for success in his career, and he was sure that it was normal to devote most of his time to work in order to ensure a better future for himself and Keisha. However, now he began to realize that the future might never come if he did not pay attention to the present. This was a difficult realization for a person accustomed to measuring career success by achievements and money. But now Marcus realized that his true happiness does not depend on success at work, but on his relationship with Keisha. He had to learn how to find a balance between career and family life, which required him to give up some of his ambitions and reevaluate his priorities. For Keisha, for her part, it was important to learn how to let go of the little things. Her perfectionism often prevented her from seeing the positive aspects of their life together. The constant struggle for order and perfect organization of life made her miss moments of joy and intimacy, which were much more important. She realized that sometimes it's better to close your eyes to the mess and just enjoy time together with Marcus than trying to fix every little thing. These changes in her perception allowed her to feel more relaxed and open to new opportunities in their relationship. One of the main concessions Marcus had to make was about his job. He realized that his pursuit of career achievements was distancing him from Keisha, and that he needed to learn how to limit his time devoted to work. It was not an easy step, because his career success was an important part of his identity. But for the sake of their marriage, he decided to give up constant overwork, late calls, and endless work tasks in order to spend more time with his wife. It wasn't an easy decision for him, but Marcus realized that success in his personal life is much more important than winning a career. Keisha, in turn, has made an important decision regarding her expectations. She realized that her dreams of a perfect marriage with a perfect life were an illusion, and that the reality was constant work on the relationship. She had to admit that both Marcus and she were ordinary people with their flaws, and that their marriage would never be perfect. Instead of waiting for Marcus to become the perfect husband, Keisha began to appreciate his efforts and sincere attempts to improve their relationship. This gave her a sense of gratitude and allowed her to be more flexible in her expectations. The mutual concessions also concerned the time they spent together. They both used to live in their own rhythm. Marcus was absorbed in his work and Keisha was absorbed in her projects. But now they have started to consciously set aside time to be together. They agreed that they would have dinner together several times a week, without being distracted by phones and work. These simple moments of rapprochement helped them regain their lost intimacy. They started watching movies together, walking in the evenings and discussing their plans for the future. These were small steps, but each of them filled their relationship with new meaning. One of the main achievements in their concessions was the decision to support each other in personal endeavors. Marcus, who had previously believed that his career was the most important thing, now sincerely supported Keisha in her desire to develop her own charitable foundation. He not only supported her morally, but also actively helped her with advice and ideas, using his knowledge and experience in business. This became an important moment in their relationship, because Keisha now felt that her efforts and ambitions were important to Marcus, and that she was not alone in her aspirations. Keisha also took a step forward. She no longer saw Marcus's career as a threat to their relationship. Now that he was trying to find a balance between work and family life, she realized how important his professional realization was to him. Instead of fighting his ambitions, she began to support him. This did not mean that she no longer put her interests first, but now she understood that their success as a couple depended on the ability to support each other in different areas of life. This stage of the relationship has become a key one for Marcus and Keisha. He demanded that both of them give up some of their habits and expectations in order to create new rules for living together that would meet the needs of both. Concessions were not easy, but they realized that this was the only way to save their marriage and make it stronger. Mutual respect for each other's interests and needs became the basis for their new relationship. Now Marcus and Keisha could look at their future with more confidence. They knew that their relationship would not be perfect, but they understood that each of them was ready to make concessions for the sake of common happiness. This process has become an important lesson for them, no matter how difficult it can be in a relationship. If both partners are willing to work on themselves and support each other, anything is possible. Thus, the concessions they made for each other became the basis for creating a more harmonious relationship. Their marriage was far from ideal, but now they knew that they could overcome any difficulties if they worked together. After Marcus and Keisha began to make mutual concessions and find a balance between their differences, their relationship began to gradually recover. However, as with any process of change, the result was not instantaneous. Both understood that there was still a lot of work ahead and improvements would not happen immediately. But the small steps they started to take turned out to be decisive. The daily efforts they made to maintain their relationship became the basis for further progress. It all started with little things that at first glance seemed insignificant, but over time turned out to be important in the process of their rapprochement. These small actions became a part of their daily lives and helped create a new reality in which their relationship was filled with meaning and joy again. The first step was a conscious decision to spend more time together. Previously, Marcus and Keisha each lived in their own world. He immersed himself in work, she in her activities. Their evenings together were rare, and communication was limited to discussing everyday issues or a brief exchange of news. Now they began to find time to really be together. It didn't mean drastic changes or big gestures. The intention itself was more important to pay attention to each other. They agreed that they would have dinners together several times a week. It was a simple solution, but it turned out to be surprisingly effective. Joint dinners became moments when they could talk calmly, discuss their business, share thoughts and feelings. These evenings gradually became a tradition that they began to appreciate. Keisha cooked her favorite dishes, and Marcus increasingly took on the role of an assistant, helping in the kitchen. It created a sense of comfort and harmony that had been lost for so long. Another important step was that they started spending more time outdoors. Walking in the park, which used to seem like something insignificant, has now become a way to get closer and escape from the daily hustle and bustle. During these walks, they discussed not only current affairs, but also their dreams and plans for the future. It was a time when they could be alone, without distractions, and it helped them understand each other better. The walks became a symbol of their renewed communication, simple but sincere. Marcus also realized that he needed to take more care of the everyday little things. Previously, he believed that his main task was to ensure their future by focusing on their careers. Now he realized that it was important to show his love and care not only through financial stability, but also through attention to Keisha, her needs and desires. He began to listen to her more, to take an interest in her affairs. When she talked about her work or ideas for a charitable foundation, Marcus showed real interest, asked questions, and gave advice. This helped Keisha feel that her ambitions and aspirations were important to him, that he sincerely supported her endeavors. Keisha, in turn, also began to change her attitude to small things. Her perfectionism often prevented her from enjoying life and caused disappointment if something did not go according to plan. Now she tried to be more flexible, realizing that ideal conditions are not always achievable, and that it is not so much the pursuit of perfection that is important, as the opportunity to be happy here and now. She learned not to dwell on minor misunderstandings and inconsistencies with her expectations, but instead to accept the moments as they are. This allowed her to be more relaxed and open in order to enjoy life with Marcus. One of the key steps they took to improve their relationship was to realize the need to pay attention not only to their own needs, but also to each other's interests. Marcus, who used to think that work and career were his top priorities, began to see that Keisha needed his support and involvement. Her charity foundation project had become an important part of her life, and he sincerely wanted to be a part of this process to support her dreams. Keisha, in turn, realized that she also needed to support Marcus more in his career aspirations. She used to see his work as something that kept them apart, but now she realized that his professional achievements were an important part of his personality. She became more interested in his projects, tried to be attentive and involved when he talked about his successes or difficulties at work. This helped them both feel that their ambitions and goals did not destroy their relationship, but on the contrary could become the basis for mutual support. An important step towards improving the relationship was also the realization that in marriage it is important to find time for yourself to restore internal resources. Previously, both Marcus and Keisha often forgot that personal pastime is not a luxury, but a necessity for maintaining harmony. Now they have begun to encourage each other to spend time apart, doing things that bring joy and relaxation. Keisha resumed her hobby. She started practicing yoga and drawing again, which helped her relax and feel more balanced. Marcus, in turn, began to find time to exercise and read books that interested him. This gave them both a sense of renewal and allowed them to return to the relationship with new energy and a fresh look. Another important step was to improve their emotional connection through more open and honest communication. Now that they were both ready to talk about their feelings and needs, they began to understand each other better. It wasn't easy, as both had to overcome their fears and insecurities related to vulnerability. Marcus, who used to restrain his emotions and hide his feelings, began to share his thoughts and feelings with Keisha more. This allowed her to see him from a new perspective, not as always a strong and successful person, but as a person who can also experience fears and doubts. Keisha, in turn, began to talk about her fears and frustrations, which she had been hiding for a long time. She realized that Marcus couldn't read her mind, and if she wanted their relationship to be strong, she needed to talk about her needs and expectations. These conversations became the basis for a new level of trust between them. Now they both knew that they could turn to each other not only in moments of joy, but also when they were experiencing difficulties. The small steps they began to take concerned not only the emotional sphere, but also physical intimacy. During their separation, their intimate relationship also suffered, and now they have begun to rebuild this important part of their marriage. The restoration of physical intimacy became a natural continuation of their work on emotional connection. They started spending more time together, enjoying simple things like hugs or hand walks. These moments of intimacy helped them feel connected to each other again and build trust. Every step they took strengthened their relationship and helped them return to the harmony that had been lost. However, it was a process that required patience and constant work. Marcus and Keisha understood that there would be mistakes and new challenges along the way, but they also realized that now they have a common goal to preserve and strengthen their relationship. The small steps they started to take became part of their daily lives and reminded them that even the biggest changes start with the little things. Over time, they began to feel that their marriage was once again becoming a source of joy and support, rather than stress and frustration. This feeling gave them confidence that they were on the right track. The small steps they took helped them understand that love is not always grand gestures, but daily efforts aimed at making each other's lives better. Now they both knew that the main thing was not to wait for instant results, but to keep going forward, even when obstacles arise in the way. After a long journey full of difficulties, compromises and small victories, Marcus and Keisha gradually came to a new stage in their relationship. This period was for them not only the result of many months of work, but also the beginning of a new chapter in their life together. They went through a crisis that could have destroyed their marriage, but thanks to mutual support, patience and willingness to work on themselves, they not only preserved their relationship, but also made it stronger. The new chapter of their marriage was full of realizations and changes. They no longer aspired to the illusory ideal that had seemed so desirable before. Instead, they have learned to accept each other for who they are, with all the flaws and imperfections. Their journey has taught them that an ideal relationship is not the absence of conflicts and disagreements, but the ability to work together to solve them. They realize that the main thing in marriage is not to avoid problems, but to learn to cope with them together. One of the key changes in their new lives was how they felt about their roles in the relationship. Previously, each of them had their own expectations, which often did not coincide with reality. Keisha wanted to see Marcus as the perfect partner who would always be attentive, caring and ready to share her feelings with her. Marcus, in turn, aspired to be a successful and reliable husband, ensuring their future at the expense of their careers. These expectations proved to be the cause of many disappointments, as none of them could match the idealized images. Now they have both accepted the fact that the ideal is unattainable, and that they are both imperfect. Marcus realized that his work is an important part of his life, but not his whole life. He no longer sought to constantly reach new heights by sacrificing personal happiness. Now he has learned to find a balance between career and relationships, paying attention to both professional growth and his marriage. This gave him the opportunity to feel more balanced and satisfied, as well as strengthen his relationship with Keisha. Keisha, in turn, learned to let go of her expectations and stop demanding from Marcus what he couldn't give her. She realized that her happiness did not depend on how closely her husband matched her ideals. Instead, she began to appreciate what they have here and now. Keisha was no longer striving for perfection. She was learning to enjoy the moments both good and difficult. This allowed her to feel the inner freedom and harmony that had previously been lost in the pursuit of the ideal. A new chapter in their lives was also marked by the fact that they began to actively plan their future together. If earlier their plans were scattered and each of them focused on their own ambitions, now they have become partners not only in marriage, but also in life. This concerned not only their professional and personal goals, but also their joint plans. They began discussing how they would develop together, what steps they would take to strengthen their family, and how they would support each other in difficult moments. Keisha and Marcus, as a couple, have become more aware of their actions. They began to create new traditions and rituals that help them keep in touch. One of these traditions was their regular trips outside the city. These trips allowed them to disconnect from everyday worries and focus on each other. They planned their trips together, chose the places they wanted to visit, and discussed what they would do during their travels. These moments became an opportunity for them to escape from the routine and enjoy each other's company without pressure and fuss. In addition to traveling, they also began to spend more time studying together at home. If earlier their evenings together often took place in silence when everyone was doing their own business, now they tried to find time to do something together. It could be simple things: cooking dinner, watching movies, reading books that both found interesting. They began to discuss what they had read more, share their thoughts and impressions, which helped them to better understand each other and deepen their bond. The new chapter of their lives also included working to maintain emotional intimacy. If in the past they often hid their real feelings for fear of appearing vulnerable or unnecessary, now they have become more open in their conversations. Both realized that trust is the foundation of their marriage, and that they must constantly work to strengthen it. Marcus has learned to talk more about his experiences and fears, which used to be difficult for him. He realized that Keisha is not just his wife, but also his partner, whom he can trust and share his feelings. Keisha, in turn, stopped being afraid to express her emotions. She no longer expected Marcus to figure out what was bothering her. Now she talked about her needs and desires openly, without fear of being misunderstood. This change helped both of them to understand each other better and avoid many conflicts that previously arose due to understatement and misunderstanding. In addition, their new phase of the relationship included the realization that personal space and time for oneself is an important part of a healthy marriage. They both realized that in order to maintain harmony in a relationship, you also need to find time for yourself to regain strength and maintain internal balance. Keisha began to engage more in her personal hobbies and projects, feeling no guilt for taking time for herself. Marcus also began to appreciate his moments of solitude, which helped him better cope with the stress at work. This realization allowed them to avoid many conflicts that had previously arisen due to the fact that they were too dependent on each other. Now they both felt freer in their marriage, realizing that supporting each other did not mean giving up personal interests and needs. This gave their relationship a new degree of freedom and depth. An important moment in their new life was also the acceptance of the fact that not all problems can be solved instantly. They learned not to panic when faced with difficulties, but instead to calmly discuss how to handle the situation. This allowed them to feel more confident in their abilities and not give in to emotions in moments of crisis. Instead of falling into despair or blaming each other, they began to look for compromises and joint solutions. A new chapter in their lives was also connected with the fact that they began to make plans for the future, not only in terms of career and personal achievements, but also in terms of starting a family. Now they were discussing how they see their future in a few years, what goals they set for themselves as a couple, and how they would support each other in these endeavors. Marcus and Keisha began to plan more global things, not only professional successes, but also the possible expansion of their family, travel, new projects that they could implement together. They also began to think more about how they could support each other in personal achievements. Keisha, who was actively involved in her charity project, felt that Marcus had now become her real partner in this business. He not only supported her morally, but also helped with advice, shared his experience, and even offered his help in implementing some aspects of her foundation. This gave Keisha confidence that she was not alone in her aspirations, and that her husband really cared about her success. Marcus, in turn, felt that his efforts at work and in his personal life had become more balanced. He no longer felt the constant pressure of having to reach new heights in his career, because he realized that his personal happiness did not depend solely on professional success. Instead, he found satisfaction in being able to support Keisha and make joint plans with her for the future. The new chapter of their lives was full of realizations that relationships require constant work and attention. They no longer expected everything to be perfect, but now they knew how to deal with difficulties and support each other in any situation. This experience has made their marriage stronger and given them the confidence that they can overcome any challenges that come their way. Now they both felt that they could truly enjoy their lives together, because they had learned to appreciate the moments they spent together and to support each other in any circumstances. Their new chapter was the beginning of a more mature, conscious and harmonious relationship where each of them could be themselves and at the same time feel loved and supported.